Welcome back to Ask the Educator, a podcast for all professionals involved in medical device processing and sponsored by Healthmark Industries. The education team here at Healthmark has 280 years of combined experience in areas ranging from sterile processing, endoscopy, OR, biomed, to hospital and industry leadership. Our goal is to leverage our collective experience to answer one of your questions each episode, giving you the practical tips you need to succeed in the evolving world of device processing. My name is Kevin Anderson, clinical educator here at Healthmark, and I will be your host. Let's get started. All right. Hello, everyone. This is Kevin Anderson, your host for Ask the Educator. And today I have a very special guest with me for this episode, none other than Nancy Chobin. Hopefully, everybody in the sterile processing world knows Nancy Chobin by now. I was so eager to do a program for her this past year, for one of her management seminars, and unfortunately it had to be canceled. But thankfully, I have her on the line today. So Nancy, welcome to the show.
Thank you for inviting me. I consider it an honor.
All right. Thank you. So today, Nancy, part of the reason why we wanted to bring you on the show is one of the big topics of discussion right now in the industry, I believe, is centered around education, whether it's certification, and obviously some other topics are tied to that, like pay and all that. But it's a big discussion going on. I actually did a podcast with Tony Monaco recently, and a lot of people may not know Tony personally, but 20 years ago, he was very heavily involved in helping New Jersey become one of the first states require certification. And here we are now in 2021. And I think just recently it was Pennsylvania that adopted the certification mandate. So Nancy, you've had tons of experience in the education realm around sterile processing. So we just wanted to get your thoughts about where we've been, where we started, where you started even with your program, and what does it look like going into the future? And just some of your opening thoughts, if you will, just on education in general and SPD, and then we'll go from there.
Well, I actually, when I got into sterile processing, I'd been in nursing, and I had done some public health nursing, and then a job came open in sterile processing. And the infection control nurse at the hospital asked me if I would take the job. And the only requirement at that time, and we're talking about 40 years ago, was that you were a nurse and you knew how to manage a budget. No problem. I get into the department and I said, whoa, was I surprised? And what made it even worse was when I started asking questions of the staff, nobody could answer my questions. And I said, this is really scary. And there were no resources back then. There was a technician training program that Isham had. New Jersey had a technician training program, very rudimentary. There weren't even textbooks back then. But it really frustrated me because I'm one of those people, I have to really understand why something is done. It drives me crazy if somebody says you have to do this and I ask why and they go, just do it. So through a lot of self-teaching, going to seminars, reading, joining AMI, the Association for the Advancement of Medical Instrumentation, joining our New Jersey Central Service Group, which is how we forged our relationship with Tony Monaco. That really made me realize how woefully inadequate the training was for sterile processing managers. Now, when you think about it, sterile processing managers have multidimensional responsibilities. They have to have numerous knowledge and skills areas that directly impact on both employee and patient safety. Many of the people who are in the management position work their way up the ladder from an SPD technician, or they transferred from the operating room where they were a surgical technician or an OR nurse. And like me, once they get an SPD, the reality hits that, this is way out of my ball field. And so we need to understand that you can't just drop somebody into sterile processing and expect them to be successful. In addition to basic management and human resources skills, which usually you can get through your hospital, they usually have leadership classes. When you work in an SPD, it requires a thorough knowledge of the rules and regulations that guide sterilization practices. And in my experience, where I've consulted over 400 facilities, This is sorely lacking. And many of these managers have a business background, and that might be helpful. But we have to understand that our obligations to the patient supersedes all other requirements. Just because someone has a bachelor's degree or a master's degree doesn't mean they know anything about sterilization. So patient safety can best be ensured when your sterile processing manager is knowledgeable in all the current standards and regulations. As you know, our Bible is ANSI AMI SC 79, and that clearly states that all of the activities of sterile processing should be supervised by competent, qualified personnel, and personnel assigned to supervisory functions should be prepared for this responsibility by education, training, and experience. So this is an awesome responsibility. And unfortunately, I think many times the managers just see them as a manager. They're not directly connected to what's going on in the department. You have to be visible. You have to be out there. You have to see what's going on. Your staff needs to know that you're in it with them. You have to care about the people that you're leading. A leader has to have a firm grasp on the objectives, missions, and values of the facility. And one of the things that sometimes is lacking is a sense of humor because, SPD can get really crazy sometimes. And you can't enjoy your work unless you're having fun. So you have to create an environment where there's a strong focus on what your department is doing right, not just every time something is wrong, getting the group together and saying, oh, we did this wrong today. You have to let people know that there is, that your department is number one and what you're doing is number one.
Nancy, you just brought up so many great points, and I can't help but relate to so many of them. Number one, maybe you don't know this about me, but I am a former OR nurse myself who did end up finding myself in the SPD manager role. And I had that same wow factor when I got in there and realized how much I didn't know and immediately had to attack the AMI materials and aggressively learn on the job. And so you're absolutely right when it comes to that. And even as a technician, I'd suspect that there's a pretty steep learning curve getting into the management role as well. So lots of things that unfortunately or fortunately, however you look at it, I can definitely relate to that. And I wonder, what is the solution, going forward, especially with these valuable leadership roles? You had touched on, just not knowing and that the leader should be an expert in the industry. And I remember and recall so many times where the doctor, the surgeon, is making the call whether or not we're IUSSing or whether or not we're going to early release an implant. And a lot of times that kind of takes me aback now that I know the sterile processing side. And I know that just because they're a doc, they don't know the correct sterilization parameters and how it's really supposed to be done. They were not trained in that. So it's a little odd to me having somebody not an expert make those final decisions, but you hit on a lot of very important things. And so it's the question, I think, is, going forward, how do we improve that thing? And I know that you've done a lot of work specifically around trying to train management, which I think is phenomenal. And I'm wondering, are we getting enough of them? Are we getting enough of them into the certification courses? Are we getting them enough resources going forward as this profession continues to evolve? And what are your thoughts on that, Nancy?
Well, I actually, out of my frustration, after 5 years in sterile processing, developed, and of course, this is 25 years ago, I developed a sterile processing management course because I was as frustrated trying to keep up with all the information just from AMI alone. And I said, if I'm having this trouble, other people are having this trouble. So the course over the past 25 years has really evolved. But to your point, I get maybe 20, 25 people. In the past, I've had as many as 50 when I did it like in Vegas or someplace like that. Even with certification, when you look at the number of managers who are certified compared to technicians, it's woefully inadequate. And, that's a real concern to me because you are ultimately responsible. I do a lot of legal consulting. And the deficiencies that I see in management of the department is very, very scary. You should not be managing a sterile processing department unless you know what you're doing. And to your point with the surgeons, I can tell you that when you know what the standards are, you can have a discussion with a surgeon because they do not know sterilization. And when I sit down with a surgeon because they want me to sterilize an Army Navy retractor that he had his neighbors weld on some little laryngoscope bulbs because he wants it to work as a lighted Army Navy retractor. And I explained to him this isn't happening. And then, of course, they start in with screaming and yelling to intimidate you. And after they get done, I tell them very nicely and very professionally, Doctor, I don't tell you how to do surgery. Don't tell me how to do sterilization. This is why we cannot do it. And then I give them the good, the bad, and the ugly. I'm here to protect you and your patient. When you want this device to go into a cycle where it was not FDA cleared, we do not know if it's safe. If something happens, you're responsible and the patient is responsible. And thirdly, I'm responsible for being foolish enough to sterilize it. Do we want to go down this road?
That's right.
And if they still continue, then I do pull my card out and say, fine, if you want to continue, I'm going to risk management and I'm filing an incident report. Because I did have one surgeon that went behind my back and had the operating room flash it. And unfortunately, they did. And when I found out about it, it was not pretty. So, when they know that you are knowledgeable, believe me, they respect you. And they don't come after you anymore. I actually, in my career at Barnabas Health over 30 years, I had surgeons who would call me and say, hey, I have a problem with this thing. I don't know what to do. I need a certain kind of an instrument. They would contact me and ask my opinion, or even for stuff going on in their office. That's the kind of relationship you need to develop. And you're not going to develop it if you go in there trying to, give them all this fluff, and they want the facts. Only the facts. The doctors don't have a lot of time. So you have to tell them exactly why you can't do it. Stand behind it, say, here's the standard of regulation, and these are the ramifications if you do. And let me tell you, they get it because they don't want to get sued either.
They do get it, Nancy. And when you put it that way, and when you have the ability to go in there and explain it appropriately, it does strike a chord with them because they have standards to live up to when it comes to the standards of care and how they're going to perform their operation and all of those things. They know even on newer ways to do surgeries, they have data and they have evidence to support new ways of doing things. And
Right.
they have to live up to the standard of care in their practice, as do we, but we have to be better advocates, more knowledgeable, and be able to speak to it. And you're absolutely right. If you can do that, they are definitely going to respect you. And it may take a little while to get it and to earn that respect, but they will. Eventually they will, for sure. And I've seen it in my own personal experience as well.
Yeah. And so that's one of the advantages, with the management course. It's a 4-day course. We go through every single AMI document, every standard, every regulation, and we have time to talk. One of the things that comes out often in these classes is, well, I try to do that, but then the doctor says, yeah, but at XYZ hospital down the street, they allow me to do it. And, I said, that's where you have to stand up and say, I'm not working at XYZ hospital. I'm only responsible for what happens here. And these are the standards and regulations that we follow. And they need to understand that. It's unfortunate, but that's reality. Because again, as I said, there are a lot of people out there who don't know the standards or guidelines, or choose not to implement them because they don't want to go up against the operating room or the surgeon. That is your responsibility. In a court of law, if you allow a device to be processed and that device should not have been reprocessed, the only person who's going to get prosecuted or wind up in the lawsuit is you, because you put it in the sterilizer. So you became the manufacturer of that device. And you need to understand that. And I don't think a lot of the managers do.
Yeah, I think as a nurse, we're used to, thinking of things like that. And we learn it in school on day one. If you didn't document it, you didn't do it. And,
Right.
Many of us have been in depositions or other type of legal proceedings. And we know, unfortunately, that there's a side of what we do that involves those very uncomfortable places. And I don't know that up until more recent history that that's been going on for very long in the SPD world. But now this department and this industry has come under a microscope, and we are becoming more and more vulnerable to those types of legal ramifications. People understand now that these devices have direct impact on SSIs and whether or not the patient does well and outcomes and all of those things. And they're also becoming more and more aware of those dynamics that you speak of, where the doctor's calling the shots, or SPDs being bullied into doing, different things that are outside of the standard. And that's not okay anymore.
I don't think that a lot of people understand that in the operating room, the surgeon has the right to assume that everything brought into that room was safe for the patient, or it wouldn't have been brought in there. So when we released something from our department and we allowed it to go out just so that we could quiet the doctor, then we are totally responsible. And for some reason, people just don't get that. They think, well, I have to keep the surgeon happy. And unfortunately, in some facilities, the hospital wants to keep the surgeon happy, and in some cases will force the sterile processing manager to do something that they know is not correct. And I get many phone calls from people and say, what do I do now? After COVID started going down and they started opening up and doing elective surgeries again, I had a young lady call me from the Midwest and said, we're starting to do surgeries and we're swamped. And I was told to just take the instruments, rinse them off, put them in the washer, not bother with the sonic or anything because we don't have time. And she said, and I know this is wrong, but when I told them this is wrong, they told me to just do it or else. I mean, that was a technician. So, and especially in a surgery center, there's not too much you can do. I told them, I said, I would just put something in writing and just say, I will do what you're telling me, but I'm letting you know that this is not accepted practice. I said, because this way you've documented that you were forced to do it. And it's unfortunate because people can't just leave their job. But what's worse than doing something that you know is wrong?
Yeah, that is a pretty sticky situation. And I wonder how often that probably does happen in the ASCs, only because many of them are physician owned, not all of them are hospital owned. I'd say if it was a hospital owned situation, at least you have a reporting structure to follow. And hopefully you have the support of infection control and administration. But unfortunately, in some of those scenarios, you might be talking to the boss who's operating, and the owner. And that definitely makes for a sticky situation. And hopefully they got that place turned around, because that's a pretty scary situation. And we need to help our audience to find possible solutions to this. And I think one of the solutions is that education piece. And you mentioned it earlier about how the difference between how many people are certified for technician as to management. And how do we get that to grow? How do we impact that over the long haul? Because like you, I believe that is a key component to safety and lifting this industry up into the future. Because let's look at this real quick, Nancy. I looked at nursing compared to sterile processing, and nursing licensure was first a requirement in 1903 in all 48 of the states less than 20 years later. So in 1921, all 48 of the continental United States required licensure. And that was back in the early 1900s. And here we are almost 20 years later for sterile processing, and we only have 5 states requiring certification.
And unfortunately, and I know certification, the way it's written, is better than nothing, but New Jersey is still the only state that requires that you be certified within 3 years of hire. We do not have grandfathering. And I wish it could have been done another way in the other states, because it's going to take a very long time for their patients to really reap the benefits. And they do have that managers have to be certified. But again, they're all, grandfathered also. I think it has to come from within. I think that, the manager has to recognize, first of all, the responsibility. It's not just a job where you're getting paid more money. We all want to get more money, but with that money comes responsibility. your responsibility to the patients, to your physicians, to your hospital. And you have to make sure that you know what you're doing, that when you accept that job, that all of the responsibilities you're going to be able to affect. And we also need to have support for the managers to get this additional education. Some of them, have no problem. I have people that, their hospital pays for it. They come every couple of years to get updated. And I have other people that are paying on their own, with their credit card so they could pay it a little bit at a time. And I commend these people because they're really trying to make sure that they're providing the best possible practice for their patients. But it has to come from the manager, and they have to, really understand the importance of getting the education. And not only just getting the education, but then remaining current. I mean, I do this full time and I could just about keep current. We have 5 new amendments that are coming out from Amy any day. We're waiting for ST91, the endoscope document. 9 months it was approved, and we're still waiting for that to be published. And that's going to rock everybody's world with all the changes in that. You've got to remain current. You've got to be someone who's going to be a resource, not only for your staff, but for your hospital. Because in many facilities, they still don't have centralized processing. So you go into the cath lab or you go into radiology, and they're all doing their own high-level disinfection. And sometimes it's not pretty.
Oh my gosh. Yeah, you're not kidding. Between even simple things like transporting instruments,
Oh, gosh. Yeah.
to and from sterile processing, if they got that far, even to TEE probes, which I'm sure you're very familiar with.
Yeah.
But that was an issue because they were trying to HLD those with the staff in that interventional cardiology department, which,
Wow.
There wasn't reprocessing experts over there. And it's often the case in facilities all over the place is they have just these sort of isolated departments here and there and these satellite clinics and things like that, where it's just kind of like the wild, wild west. There's so much work to be done. And just like you said, to stay current on it. I love that you brought up SD91 and then the amendments to SD79. I mean, you're absolutely right. I mean, the things are changing. And I tell people when I do webinars, even our patient population is changing. Much of the time when they come in, they're a lot more acutely ill, and you have, more super bugs to deal with. Like, the stakes are much higher these days, and we got to get our education up to snuff when it comes to either managing or just being a tech, in my opinion.
Yeah, I agree. When we talk about the managers, not only, being a voice for themselves, but they also have to be a voice for their staff, because some of the salaries in sterile processing are woefully inadequate. I developed a career ladder when I was at Barnabas. Everybody said it would never get done because most of our hospitals were unionized. The union loved it. They thought it was great so that people could get promoted. You've got to show your staff that you're in it together with them, and that, you're doing everything you can to help them not only be successful, but to grow in their position as well.
Yeah, that career ladder is a great idea. And I will tell you, I don't know how your experience was with it. We had sort of a modified one. It was only 2 steps. Well, 3 technically, if you count the lead or supervisor role, but we had a small clinical ladder. I think it should be a little bit bigger than it is, but nonetheless, it was kind of a lot of work, even though a lot of the infrastructure was already there. So if you want a clinical ladder that doesn't already exist, it's a great thing to go for, but be prepared to do some homework on that so that it happens. But it's a valuable tool to get people a way to get promoted, increase their knowledge, all of those things. And hopefully, the end result is actually safer care for your patients as well. And I think that is probably the case, as it was in the nursing realm when you go from associate's degree to bachelor's degree. I'm sure having no certification to certification has a similar impact on patient safety.
Yes, I agree. Actually, what we did, I did a white paper for administration, because at that time we had 9 hospitals in our system, and we were losing a lot of SPD people to the surgery centers because no weekends, no holidays, and no evenings, and they were paying them like 50 cents, 75 cents an hour. You don't think that's much, but to somebody who's in sterile processing, it could mean a lot.
Sure.
And so I did a paper and I showed how much money we were losing because when we had to hire new people, I did two studies that were published in AORN 10 years apart on the cost of training a sterile processing worker. And based on the number of people that we lost times the cost that it was to the facility to recruit and retrain a new person, which was $500,000, we were able to develop our career ladder and save money.
Wow. Nancy, I hope that people are listening, because I think what you just touched on in terms of the opportunity that's there, because I think that that's something that everyone can relate to in their sterile processing department, that they have issues with turnover, whether they're losing staff to other facilities for other sterile processing departments that are paying more. But even in my experience, I saw people leaving to go and do other jobs that were outside the industry that were paying more.
Yeah,
And it's a
absolutely.
terrible thing to lose somebody, especially when they already have some knowledge and background and even some passion around the profession as a whole. And then they leave just because they're going to get paid more, But
Yeah.
I don't blame them either, because you got to make a decent wage to live in this country, and all over the world, really. But it's very important that these people get paid what they're worth. And I think education goes a long way to getting them what they're worth. It's not where it needs to be, but I think it's a step in the right direction. And I think you were able to illustrate that with your paper and how you showed the turnover and the cost of it and all that. And I hope that people are coming and they're going to your programs for management and learning how to do that in their facility. Even if they're not at your program, work with your surgical director who's familiar with all of that stuff, and maybe they can help you, right? I mean, use all those resources that you have.
Absolutely. And that's why I try to also do articles for AORN. I did one last year on decontamination to show how the operating room has to really work collaboratively with SPD so that the instruments are pre-cleaned, that they're put back in their respective container and what have you. I mean, we have to work together. But it seems to carry a little more weight when it's published in AORN, because then you can show it to the OR director. I'm doing one now for them on manufacturer's instructions for use, so they understand the implications of why we can't just throw something in the sterilizer. So, I try and do that to act as a resource, because this way, it helps people to affect change.
Well, thank you so much for that, Nancy. And I appreciate talking about education with you, especially since you've been such an ambassador of it for so long now. It's just truly an honor.
Well, thank you again for inviting me. I really consider it an honor, and thank you again.
That was Nancy Chobin, CEO at Sterile Processing University. I don't know about you, but I learned a lot in that short conversation with Nancy, and I hope that you did too. I want you to know to be on the lookout for a second episode with Nancy when we talk about all things related to productivity. That's going to be a really good one. So please remember to subscribe to our podcast and to share this podcast with all your peers throughout the industry. And thank you all again for listening. All opinions expressed on this show are those of the presenters. Before using any medical device, it is important to review the device manufacturer's instructions for use.